What if I told you there is a map in Dead by Daylight that was so poorly designed that it could be a terrible experience for killer and survivor? A map that's as equally as hated on one side as it is the other. A map that was a problem on release and still is a problem all these years later. I'll cut the suspense, you saw the thumbnail, you know what it is. Today I'm taking on the daunting task of talking about the Gideon Meat Plant, or as most call it, the game. But as you may know, this isn't my first time talking about this map. A few weeks ago, I made a video ranking each and every map in Dead by Daylight in terms of how good or bad they were for each side, and considered them balanced depending on if they were balanced. I know, groundbreaking stuff. In that video, I mentioned that there were some maps that I had a lot more to say about, but due to the nature of the video, I didn't want to spend too long focused on one map in particular. However, I did keep mental notes of the ones I thought I could say a lot more about, so here we are. Ranking those maps was actually pretty hard, as I had to set up a lot of specifics to make the placement of the maps make any sort of sense. A map that's terrible for Ghostface might be great for Blight, just due to the differences in killer strength and power. A fact that a few of you made sure to point out to me in the comments. Power disparity is one of the factors that make ranking anything in DBD tough, unless you're ranking something specifically about that, like killer tier lists and stuff like that. This led me to making some tough calls about certain maps, like Azerov's resting place for example, which on paper would be one of the most survivor-sided maps in the game, but due to certain playstyles could be a pretty easy win for killer depending on the perks or power you're using. This led to a lot of confusion for many people due to how I place some maps, which is certainly my fault. I ranked them to the best of my ability and tried to be honest about my personal experience on each map, but some were much harder than others. Sometimes it's really easy to tell which maps are killer-sided and which are survivor-sided, but some maps really aren't that cut and dry. Indoor maps are typically the biggest offenders just due to how much better some killers play in closed off areas, and how easy they can be to lose chase on when playing survivor. While a map like Hawkins was pretty easy to rank just based on the size of the map and the tiles, or lack thereof, some other maps are a lot harder to give a specific ranking. The game, which I'm going to be calling Gideon because saying the game over and over again gets really confusing, is just extremely poorly designed and bad for both sides at times. Not necessarily bad for the killer or survivor, which it is. Don't worry, we'll get there. But bad in terms of overall design. So let's figure out why Gideon sucks and how we could possibly fix it for the future. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, which is me. Coming up with these video ideas is getting harder and harder. Even though I have a lot of videos that I plan on making, I don't want to make them one after the other, so I'm struggling a little bit to come up with video ideas to stick in between the uploads I'm really excited about. For example, I hope to cover the history of practically every DBD killer at some point, but I don't want to do them back to back, if that makes any sense. So for the sake of my brain, if you have any topics you want me to talk about, make sure to leave them in the comments so I can see them. I check comments pretty often, so putting those ideas down there is a great way for me to know what kind of stuff you guys want to see. If I pick somebody's idea, I'll be sure to shout out the person that left the comment at some point in the video, and if you don't want that sort of attention, just let me know in the comment. I really want to build an interactive community here, and telling me what you guys want to see is a mutually beneficial way to do that, so if you have an idea, let me know in the comments below. Anyway, back to the video, enough lollygagging. I guess it would make the most sense to start out with the map layout and structure, so let's begin there. That's a pretty simple way to do it. Gideon is a surprisingly small map, with the top floor being only 76 square tiles and the lower floor being only 66 square tiles. While you'd think this would make the map shockingly small and easy to win on when playing killer, that couldn't be further from the truth. At least some of the time, we'll get into it. Due to how the floors are stacked and the sometimes hard to navigate stairs, this map feels much larger than it actually is, and when combining the square tiles of the two floors, we get 142 square tiles, which is much closer to how it actually feels to play on. This double floor setup is what separates Gideon from the rest of the indoor maps, other than Midwich, which ends up running into the same issues that this design creates. I'm sure I'll give Midwich its own video at some point. Due to its small size, Gideon ends up feeling very cluttered and pressed together, which makes tiles feel like they're right next to each other, which for the most part they are. Other than some slight changes due to RNG, such as which doors end up closed, there's no real good place to take chases, if you can even find survivors to begin with. You can't run like 10 meters without finding a pallet, which can oftentimes be in the exact same room, like the two pallets near the bathroom or the room right above it, which also has two pallets. It's called the Room of Safety for a reason. This is one of the many examples you can point to for why Gideon feels so miserable to play for most of the killers, especially ones that have a considerably slow start. Most of the time, if survivors know how to run forward, it's gonna take a little bit of time to get some pressure rolling, which can be a big deal. On the other side, this double floor setup can also work in the killer's favor, but it heavily depends on what you're bringing to the match. Killers like Doctor, Demogorgon, and Nemesis can sometimes do great on this map, while others might really struggle. This extends to certain perks too, especially ones that can make use out of the killer's terror radius, like Infectious Fright, Chlorophobia, or Surge. Even Hex and Boon perks are great here, because a lot of the totems are hidden in corners or like private areas where the survivors or killer won't find them unless they're intentionally looking for the totem. But to be fair, that is just an indoor map problem, but Boon perks are especially bad on this map due to how they transcend floors. I'm sure you've experienced this at least once. Buffed Dark Theory is going to be miserable to go against on this map because for some reason they didn't change it back after they decided not to stack. Anyway, that's a whole different topic. As you can imagine, these problems can also extend to 3-gen scenarios too, which sometimes have a good chance of spawning due to the smaller size of the map. If you're locked into a 3-gen scenario against a killer who has Surge, good luck. You're in for a very fun time. This double floor setup just ends up leading to a lot of issues that don't do a great job of reinforcing fun and interesting gameplay, which is definitely felt by both sides. Most of the time, killers are going to be the biggest beneficiaries from this sort of setup, especially when playing a stronger killer who can constantly spread pressure. While this sounds like the map would be easy for that role, it's far from that due to the other issues this map has. The biggest problem with Gideon by far is the pallets. There's just pallets on top of pallets on top of pallets. There are so many pallets. Like I said, you can't run 10 meters without finding another pallet to drop, which might be manageable as a killer depending on who you're playing, but a lot of the killers in the roster just end up getting neutered by the abundance of them. Yes, obviously if you're playing a killer who couldn't give a wet fart about pallets, you won't care, but most killers will. If it were a bunch of unsafe pallets that you could easily mind game, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but they aren't. Most of the pallets on this map are incredibly safe, and there are even some god pallets scattered around for good measure. A chunk of the tiles on this map have really great visibility, which makes mind gaming them almost impossible unless the survivor isn't paying attention. This leaves a lot of chases to just end up feeling like both sides are only moving forward until the survivor is forced to drop the pallet because the killer is too close. Then they get to the next pallet and the cycle continues. The worst part about these tiles is that they're always consistent, which means RNG will never be tilted in favor of one side or the other. It's just always in favor of survivor, which sucks. This makes matches on Gideon feel almost like you're playing on autopilot, at least while in chase. However, when you finally manage to get rid of all the pallets and the game somehow isn't over at that point, there's nothing else to use. There's almost no windows on this map, but the windows that do exist are incredibly strong, like the 3 windows that exist on this map. Like, for example, the one in the freezer and the drop-down window, which are, again, right on top of each other. It's like this map was designed specifically to piss me off. This means that killers who can get rid of pallets quickly are just gonna force the pallets down until there's nothing left, while the killers who have to be a little more creative at loops are just gonna get rolled with not a lot of options. Due to the way some of these rooms are designed, if the killer chooses to push a chase in a certain direction, a choice that's always in the killer's hands, by the way, sometimes survivors just get forced against a wall and just die because they have nowhere else to go and just have to hope they aren't injured or exposed because they're going down and there's practically nothing they can do about it. You see what I mean when I say this map is dumb and poorly designed? There's just no interesting chases that really happen here. There's practically no skill expression at loops because you just run around the pallet until the killer gets close enough and then drop the pallet, and due to the lack of windows, there's no way to extend chases beyond that. If players decide to act really safe, matches on Gideon turn into an absolute slog, and only killers who can delete pallets quickly are going to perform well, but then the match turns into a slog for the survivors. There's like no winning. And then you have the issues which are kind of specific to certain scenarios. For example, Gideon has one of the safest basements to hook survivors in, especially if both pallets nearby are gone. If the killer decides to camp the survivor they place in the basement, good luck getting them out. It's probably not happening. In sort of the same vein, we also have the exit gates, which always spawn across the map from each other in the same spot. While that's not the biggest deal overall, it does make the endgame feel very samey and dull, and if the survivors are hooked in specific spots, they're either going to be extremely easy to get out or impossible to get out, with almost no in between. This is why I struggled to place Gideon in a certain spot while ranking them. It sort of has the same problem that Azerov's does, where the strength of the map is so cooked because it entirely depends on how you choose to play, or, your opponents choose to play. If the survivors are coordinated and communicating well, they'll most likely be fine, but if the killer brings some specific stuff, it's gonna be miserable for the survivors. Somehow they managed to make a map that nobody likes, and the ones that do like it, the people that bring offerings for it, usually have some sort of scheme at play where they can make the most use out of whatever dumb shit they decide to bring. Balanced landing, boons, hexes, surge, infectious fright, slugging, stuff like this can make the map absolutely cheeks for either side, which is why I don't have a hard time saying that Gideon is the perfect example of how not to design a map. There's just so much working against the gameplay of this map, and it never really feels like a fun experience. Obviously, that does depend on if you're at the receiving end or not, because if you bring the dumb shit, you'll be having a good time, but if you're not gonna be having a good time, obviously. So if behavior knocked on my door and was like, Skrump, how do we fix this map? What do we do to make this map better? What would I change? Well, I'd start with the pallets that spawn. I think if behavior cut the strength of the pallets in half and increased the amount of windows, that would definitely be a start. There needs to be some more skill expression on Gideon, as the whole W mentality that this map creates is excruciatingly boring to play against. There are the odd loops here and there that you can be kind of creative with, and I do enjoy how great the map can be for holding killers. I think that's a really fun way to play the game. There isn't nearly enough to work with, and it kind of depends on if you bring balanced landing or not, if you want to combine stuff on different floors a lot of the time. What's interesting to think about is on the lower floor, there are some regular jungle gyms. You have a TL tile, you have a long wall jungle gym, and you have a short wall jungle gym, which are, you know, they're regular to play. People are used to playing those sorts of tiles. But the issue with that is that the map is so cluttered that it doesn't matter how well you play the tiles if you can just run somewhere else and instantly drop a god pallet and then get a ton of distance on the killer. A lot of this has to do with the small map size and how very, very congested everything is. If they change the layout of the map and the size, I think this would be a much more enjoyable map to play on. If they cut down the bottom floor significantly in size and just made the top floor bigger, that would fix a lot of the issues that are created by having the floors right on top of each other. It makes perks like Surge or Dark Theory much less annoying to face off against when you don't have to worry about the killer or the boon being right above or below you. I think making the top floor a bit closer to the regular size of most maps and only really having the bottom floor used for like the basement or a single generator would make the map feel a lot better to play on. I guess what I'm saying is that the map needs a massive design overhaul and needs to be made more interactive for everyone. Gideon has had nothing but problems for its entire existence, and I can't help but feel like the reason for that is because the structure of the map is just flawed. And the best way to fix that is to give the map another rework, which I would say it for sure needs. It's somehow boring for everyone, which is honestly a really impressive feat. This map desperately needs some changes, but given that the map hasn't had any huge changes since 2021, I don't see that happening anytime soon. They really need to change this map to make it feel a bit more dynamic and interesting to play by adding more windows and having more interesting loops to play instead of just basic junk tiles that you run around and then drop the pallet when the killer gets close enough. It leads to boring gameplay, and that just isn't healthy for the game. But until then, that's it for me, gamers. Have a great day.